Welcome back to Train Signal. This is Elias Kanaser, and you're watching Working with Data Protection Manager 2012. This is an interesting lesson that we're about to go through. And I say interesting because after you're done watching it, it's going to feel very disconnected, very foreign to the type of material that we've been working with up until this point. And to be honest with you, the only reason this lesson is in this course is because you're probably going to get a question or two on the exam around Data Protection Manager. So I wanted to give you kind of a look, a feel to understand what's going on. The topic is not overly exciting. It's essentially backup and recovery. And if you've dealt with any software that deals with backup and recovery in the past, you'll find that most of these concepts are going to be the same. Most of the tasks are going to be the same. You have to add disks and add agents and install agents, and it's not very exciting, although Data Protection Manager as a backup solution, as a data protection solution, is very slick. It's very neat. It's very easy to use, and it's very powerful. I thoroughly enjoy it. I do want to take you through it. We're going to perform certain tasks, and we're going to talk a little bit about Data Protection Manager. Some of the benefits that Data Protection Manager brings to the table is that you can connect that to disk, or you can connect it to tape, or you can kind of use both, right? So if you're using short-term disk, for instance, for short-term storage, and then you can use tape for archival purposes. DPM obviously also supports VSS nowadays. Any kind of a respectable backup solution that doesn't support VSS is really of no use. And then DPM also supports deduplication, which is very useful. So if you have, you're backing up multiple hosts, and these multiple hosts, for instance, have the same bits. Maybe there's two virtual machine templates, or 2 or 3 virtual machines that are running Windows 2012 on there. Well, instead of backing this up 4 or 5 times, it'll back it up essentially once and create those difference disks, so it can understand what the differences are between those two files. So deduplication helps a lot. But at the heart of the backup solution, and is particularly DPM, it's very important to understand VSS, otherwise known as the volume shadow copy, which is a function of the actual operating system. So what I want to do is I want to spend a few minutes explaining VSS. For those of you that know it, this will be a quick refresher. For those of you that don't, this will give you an idea of why VSS is so important. So there are several components to VSS that you should be aware of. So for starters, you have the volume shadow copy service here, otherwise abbreviated as VSS. And that has a couple of different components. It has the requester component here, and it also has the writers component here, and it has the provider. Now I'm going to start with the easy one. The provider is essentially your link into the actual disk. That's what connects you from Windows, for instance, to the local disk. You're getting that via the default system provider. Now if this was connecting to a SAN, whether it's iSCSI or anything else, then that provider would essentially be your hook into that disk array. Your requester here, think of the requester as essentially your backup software, whatever that backup software might be. And this is without virtualization. I haven't introduced virtualization into the mix yet. This is what it looks like before we introduce virtualization. So think of the requester as your backup software. It could be essentially your backup agent. Now over on the left here you have your writers. Your writers are those hooks into VSS that transactional applications typically communicate with VSS with. Now why do you need those? Well, without those, then volume shadow copy wouldn't know how to necessarily back up a particular application, because each application likes to be backed up in a certain way and also likes to be restored in a certain way. What the writers are providing are enough information so that volume shadow copy, for example, knows how to treat these transactional files, these open files, knows when to stop, take a point in time snapshot essentially, or take a point in time, put a stop there in order for it to do a backup. So every backup, at some point, there's got to be some kind of a cut in order for that backup to take effect. What volume shadow copy allows you to do with these writers, with that integration with the applications here, is to take an application consistent copy. Now, volume shadow copy, without the application consistency, just if you're backing up, for instance, Word files or open files or share files that are just on your traditional Windows operating system, it gives you, again, that consistency. It's not an application level consistency, but it's a backup consistency so that you're not getting what is known as, a crash consistent backup. A crash consistent backup essentially means that the operating system is going to take a point in time snapshot. So at a certain point, it's just going to stop all activities. It's going to take a snapshot, put that snapshot somewhere else, and then it's going to back that snapshot out. So with volume shadow copy, we're trying to avoid these crash consistent types of backups with writers that extends it even more into the applications. Now let's take a look at what happens when we add virtualization into the picture here. So as soon as you add virtualization, you'll notice that over here on the requester, now that requester is also integrating with VMware tools if you're using VMware ESX, or with integration services in the case of Hyper-V. So as you're initiating that, it's known as an assistive agent here, where the VMware tools and the integration services are the requester, and this is that particular agent is going through them in order to make that request. And again, this is very helpful because on the left here, where you see those transactional applications that require VSS so desperately, and where the actual backup software also needs it in order to take a good application consistent copy of these open files that these particular applications are running. Hence the power of VSS and the importance of making sure that whatever backup solution or data protection solution that you're using supports VSS. So that's in a nutshell what VSS does. Again, you guys probably know this. If you didn't, this was kind of a crash course in what VSS does and its importance. Now let's take a look at what are the tasks that we're going to complete during this lesson. So like I said, this is going to be a quick lesson. We're not going to spend too much time on DPM. So what we're going to do is we're going to add disks into the DPM system, the management server. We're going to install agents on some of our hosts. We're going to configure Autodiscovery schedule. We're going to look at Autodiscovery, figure out if the schedule works for us. And it's important when we're dealing with Autodiscovery here, and we'll talk about that again when we get into the GUI, to understand that the scope of Autodiscovery is limited to the DPM server domain. So wherever that DPM server, whichever domain it is member of, then that DPM Autodiscovery capability is limited to that domain. And finally, we're going to create a protection group. So if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and log in and accomplish these tasks. All right, so we're over here on our DPM server, and yes, I know another server. There's a lot of servers that were deployed, a lot of virtual machines that were deployed during this course. So yes, this is another virtual machine that I have here that I have the DPM software installed on. And if we open the management console, which you can launch from here, or you can install also on the management PC and launch it from there. Again, the installation of DPN, nothing overly exciting. It was out of the box, all accepted all the defaults and brought it to this point. Again, and the whole installation is a little out of scope, and even this particular exercise, I'm trying to go a little overboard here just to make sure that we're covering everything that you might come across on the exam. But DPN, in all honesty, requires its own course if we were to cover all of its capabilities. So we're just going to try to give you a brief run through of what's going on. So I've already installed an agent on one of my virtual machines here, VMM01. What we want to do is we want to go through that same exercise with you. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is under agents here, we're going to go ahead and click on install. This is going to start the install wizard. Now you have two options. You can either install agents right away, or you can attach agents, and this is good if the computers are behind a firewall, if you're trying to, if the agent is already installed and you're just trying to reattach it. So you have several options here alternatively to just install the agent the traditional way. We're just going to go ahead with the default here. We're going to click on next, and then we're going to find the hosts that we want to add to agents to. So what I want to do is we're going to go with Hyper-V 1, and we're also going to go with Hyper-V 2. Let's go ahead and add both of those to the mix, and let's go ahead and click on next. We're going to give this a username and password for authentication here, and make sure this username and password obviously has rights to install the software onto these hosts, and pay close attention to whether or not that Windows firewall is enabled. If it is enabled, then you want to make sure that you have all the right ports open. Otherwise, the agent deployment remotely will probably fail. So we're going to go ahead and click on Next here. Now this is really cool, and I did this on purpose. So whenever you're adding hosts that are part of a cluster, well, DPM is going to automatically detect that and say, hey, I want to back up all of the hosts that make up this cluster. As a result, it found that we haven't, selected Hyper-V 3 to have an agent added to it, and it wants to have to be able to back up the entire cluster as opposed to just, one or two hosts out of that cluster. So it prompts us for that here. So I'm going to go ahead and select it, and then we're going to go ahead and click on Next. If you're using operating systems like Windows 2003 or in Windows XP, you might need to reboot the computer automatically. Now, here's the cool thing. I'm going to select yes here, even though we're going to get an error, and the reason, well, a warning. And the reason that we're going to get a warning is because, again, because we're adding an agent to a cluster, DPM essentially doesn't want to be held responsible for rebooting, any member of that cluster and jeopardizing any of the production systems that are on there, because it doesn't have control over, well, how to evacuate these systems and reboot them and all sorts of stuff. So it's automatically throwing an error here, or a warning, to be careful that these are part of a cluster, and it will not reboot these servers, and that maybe this should be a manual function. So I just wanted you to see that. So for now, we're going to go ahead and click on No, and then we're going to click on Next. These are the hosts that we want to deploy that particular agent to, and at this point, we're going to go ahead and click on Install. Now, this will take a few seconds, maybe a few minutes here, so I can go ahead and close this and monitor the status from here. And while this is, installing, what we can do is we can add some disks. So we're going to do the same thing. If we select disks here, you'll find that I don't have anything that's added. So if I come up here to add, well, I also don't have anything added here. So what I've done is I've added a 250 gig disk to this virtual machine. I've attached it. Now, what you want to do from within Windows in order to allow DPM to see this is you want to be able to bring that particular disk online, and you want to be able to initialize it. But you don't want to create a volume out of it. You don't want to put nothing. Just initialize the disk. To do that, we're going to go over here to the local server, the server manager. Once that's up, you'll find that you have file and storage services down here. If you select those, and then if you select disks, you'll find that I have again a 250 gig disk here that's offline. So what I'm going to do is right click on it, and we're going to bring it online. Yes. Once the disk is online, what I'm going to do is again right click on it one more time, and we're going to initialize it. Go ahead and click on yes here. Once that's initialized, that's all that we need to do in order for DPM to be able to detect it. So if I go back into my DPM console here and we try to click on add one more time, you'll find that it automatically detected that disk. Now once we select add here, it's also DPM needs to make those disks dynamic. So because I've initialized it, I haven't really specified, or it's basic by default. What's going to happen now is that's going to prompt me to say, hey, you've selected a basic disk. I'm about to create a dynamic disk out of it. Okay, I'm all good with that. And voila, that is the process of adding a disk essentially to DPM. Now let's go back and check on those agents and see if our installation was successful. So we're going to go back to agents here, and voila. So we know that we now have a successful installation of agents on essentially those 4 hosts, all the Hyper-Vs and our VMM server as well. So at this point, I can create a protection group if I wanted to. But before we do that, let's go ahead and click on the options button up here. And what I want to show you here is the Autodiscovery schedule. So if you click on Autodiscovery, you have the option again here of specifying at what point do you want Autodiscovery to occur. By default, it's set to 1 a.m. Now, what is Autodiscovery and why is it useful? Well, the whole course was about automation, right? The whole course was about, not doing things that are manual and things that we can automate and that we can offload to the system. Well, we want to do that. Well, if you're building this private cloud and you're deploying DPM within it, well, you don't want to necessarily have to come through and install these agents and do that process every time, a new host comes online. What you want to do is every time a new host is introduced within the domain, because the Autodiscovery is limited to the scope of the domain in which the DPM server is a member of. So every time a new host is added, we want Autodiscovery to automatically detect this particular host and add an agent to it, and it's going to do that at a particular time every day, and it happens to be at 1 a.m. and you can go ahead and change that if you wanted to. So that's essentially your Autodiscovery. I wanted you to be aware of that. We're going to go ahead and click on OK. The last step of what I want to show you here is to create that protection group. So in order to create the protection group, we're going to come up here under Protection, and then we're going to click on New. This wizard will automatically start. What we're going to do is we are now going to go through and fulfill all of the requirements that are needed to create this new protection group. Now, what are we trying to protect? Are these servers or are these clients? In our case, these are servers. I'm going to go ahead and select it. Again, from the hosts that have agents on them, we're going to go ahead and essentially select what we are trying to protect, right? So you can drill down into each of these hosts and you can select what you want to back up. So again, you can go through and you can look at some of the cluster available resources here, so you have access to all of your cluster resources. You can come in here under the SCVMM, Web01 also. You can take a look and back that up. So you have several different things that you have available access to. So if I expand available storage here, you'll find that it automatically added the Hyper-V or the Hyper-V cluster that we had created within VMM. So you can browse through the cluster resources here and select what you want to back up, or you can also go to individual Hyper-V hosts and also choose, well, what exactly are you trying to back up off of those hosts. So for instance, if I go under all volumes here, you have the option again under the C drive of browsing that particular C drive. You can select the system protection again. Just to illustrate, I'm going to go ahead and select system protection here just because it's a small backup configuration that I can just use for demonstration purposes, and it adds all the necessary components. I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. You can give this protection group some kind of a name. So for example, you can call this the WEPS cluster protection group. Select your protection method. Are you doing this to disk or are you going to do this to tape? We don't have any kind of a tape attached to this system at this point, so the only option that I have is disk. If you had tape and you wanted to do archiving, then you would be able to select it up here, and then you'd have options for that as well down here. Once we're ready, we're going to go ahead and click on Next. What is the retention policy, the retention range? Essentially, do you want to retain this data for up to 5 days? You have the option again of configuring that. How often do you want to do your express full backups, because this retention data might be incrementals, whereas you're doing this full backup, for example, every day at 8 p.m. and you can obviously come in here and modify that significantly, where you're not doing it maybe every day, you're doing it once a week or once a month, or however way your schedule is like, and the specific time that you want to do this at as well. So again, a lot of configuration here, flexibility that you can do, and you can see this is very straightforward, very easy, and you've probably done this many times. So up next here, you have the option of configuring, what your storage is going to look like, right? So what is it going to take for me to essentially back this particular system volume up? Well, here it's saying that it requires 33 gigs. So if you click on Modify, it gives you essentially some more information on what it's trying to do. So this is the system protection database. Essentially, the data size is about 20 gig. This is getting it from our storage pool here. The replica is going to be about 30 gig in size. And then you have the recovery point here, which is about 3 gigs. So essentially, that's how it's calculating these 33.07 gigs here. If you wanted to enable deduplication, then you can select this particular option. Because of the nature of the file that I'm backing up, well, data duplication doesn't really apply. But if I was backing up something else, like an entire Windows virtual machine, for instance, then you can come in here and select this option as well. You can select automatically grow the volumes, and what that does is, if it's running out of disk space and this is selected, then you can automatically grow it so you don't have to constantly add disk. Watch out with this, obviously, so that you're not getting yourself into trouble, but it could be a very handy feature here where it's growing the storage to fit its needs, essentially. Once you're ready, we're going to click on Next. How do you want to construct essentially the replica? Do you want to do it automatically over the network, and do you want it to happen now, or do you want to do it later? Maybe you want to do it manually. Maybe you want to somehow, if it's over a slow link, or if it's in a different geography where you don't want to do it and saturate that link, maybe you do that manually and move those disks and copy them there manually, and as a result you've made that first large copy process essentially manually, and then you can configure it automatically for those differentials at a later time. So again, depending on how you want to configure your replica and DPM server, either do it automatically and immediately, or you can do this manually at a later time. Next, to continue. Here you have the option of running a consistency check against your replicas to make sure that everything is still okay. So, again, you're specifying a job here I want you to run on a daily basis, and make sure that my replica is consistent with my existing copy. Could be a handy, useful tool, but replicas don't usually go out of consistency, but again, you have this option and it's available to you, so why not? Again, I'm going to leave everything at defaults at this point, and then we're going to go ahead and click on Next here. This is a summary of what we've done, what we've configured, and what we're about to create here. Once you're ready, we're going to go ahead and click on Create Group. And this will go about creating this particular protection group. Once it's ready, you'll see that you have success on both of them. I'm going to go ahead and click on Close. From there on, it's just a matter of essentially initiating those backup jobs and working with backups and restores and just a regular backup and restore function, except there were some things that I wanted to make sure that you were aware of. Kind of as it relates to private cloud, you can see that there's really not a particular integration that we would have to do. All about, you can integrate Data Protection Manager within Service Manager. It's the same thing that we've done with all of them. It's the same type of connector, except it's a Data Protection Manager connector, and you go about filling out the right information, and that populates Service Manager essentially with all the right objects from Data Protection Manager, so that if maybe a service fails or a backup job fails, a ticket can be opened, or if you're trying to reference that a job failed, then you can reference that out of Data Protection Manager. You can do the same thing for Ops Manager, so there's that type of integration points, but nothing really specific to the Microsoft private cloud per se. However, it's on the exam, and I want to give you, a high-level overview of what you can expect, what are some of the pros, and how to use it, how to create disks, add agents, work with the auto configuration. Very simple, very straight to the point, and we've done a recap essentially of this lesson. So with that, I hope this lesson was very informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.